Compound interest, exercise 1.7, question 4 to 11. Calculate to the nearest cent where necessary the compound interest on €600 for 2 years at 5%, €1,800 at 2 years for 9%, €3,500 for 3 years at 7.5%, €7,800 for 3 years at 3.5%. So for part 1, we want the compound interest on €600 for 2 years at 5%. So the amount at the end of year 1 is going to be 600 multiplied by 1.05, which is 105%, is €630. So this is the same thing as getting 5% of 600 and adding it on. It's just a little bit quicker. So the amount at the end of year 2, so we're starting off with the €630, and again multiplying it by 1.05, which is 105%, and we get €661.50. So to get the interest, we subtract €661.50 minus the €600 that we started with, leaves us with €61.50 interest. For part 2, we want to find the compound interest on €1,800 for 2 years at 9%. So the amount at the end of year 1 is going to be €1,800 times 1.09. So that's the same thing as multiplying by 109%, or getting 9% and adding it on. So this is just the quickest way. So we get €1,962. So then we start with that. So the amount at the end of year 2 is going to be €1,962. Again, multiplied by 1.09 is €2,138.58. So to get the interest, we're going to subtract the 1,800 from the question, from 2,138.58. So the interest is equal to €2,138.58 minus the 1,800 at the start, leaves us with €338.58. So that is the interest. Part 3, we want the compound interest on €3,500 for 3 years at 7.5%. So the amount at the end of year 1 will be €3,500 multiplied by 1.075. So this is the same thing as 107.5%, or getting 7.5% and adding it on. So this is just the quickest way. And we get €3,762.50. So we start with that then for year 2. And again, we multiply by the same multiplier, 1.075, and we get €4,044.6875. It's a good idea here to keep the 4 decimal places and not to round off until the very end, because you'll have an error in your answer otherwise. 4 decimal places is more than enough, though, in the middle of your question. So for year 3, we start with that amount, so €4,044.6875. Again, we multiply it by 1.075, and we get €4,348 and 0.039. Now we can round it off because we're finished. We only had to do it for 3 years, so we round it off to 0.04, so 4 cents. So then to get the interest, we are going to subtract the €3,500 from the question, subtract that from 4,348.04, and we're left with €848.04. So that is the interest. And for part 4, we want the compound interest on €7,800 for 3 years at 3.5%. So we start with €7,800, we multiply by 1.035, we get €8,073. Then we multiply that by 1.035, and we get 8,355.555. So again, don't round off until the very end. And then we multiply that by 1.035, and we get 8,647.999, which we can round off to €8,648. So then we're going to subtract the €7,800 from the €8,648, and we're left with €848, and that is the interest. €4,600 was invested for 2 years at compound interest. If the rate for the first year was 4% and for the second year was 5%, find the total interest for the 2 years. So the amount at the end of year 1 will be €4,600 multiplied by 1.04, which is going to be €4,784. So you could also here multiply by 104%, or you could get 4% and add it on, but this is the quickest way. The amount at the end of year 2, so we're going to take the amount from the end of year 1, so 4,784, and this time we multiply it by 1.05, because in year 2, in the second year, the interest rate was different. It was 5%, not 4%. And we get €5,023.20. So to get the interest, we're going to subtract. So we're going to take €4,600, which is what we started with, away from €5,023.20, leaving us with €423.20. So this is the interest. A company borrowed €12,000 from a bank at 11% per annum per year compound interest. The company repaid €5,000 at the end of the first year. How much was owed to the bank at the end of the second year? So the amount at the end of year 1 is going to be €12,000 times 1.11, which is equal to €13,320. So this is the same thing as multiplying by 111%, or getting 11% of €12,000 and adding it on. So this is just the quickest way. So then they repaid €5,000. So the loan at the end of year 1 is going to be the €13,320 that we worked out up here, minus the €5,000 that was repaid, and that leaves us with €8,320 of a loan. So the amount at the end of year 2 will be €8,320, so that comes from here, multiplied by 1.11 is equal to €9,235.20. So that was how much was owed to the bank at the end of year 2. €2,500 was invested in a building society. If it amounted to €2,612.50 after 1 year, calculate the rate of interest. So the interest amount, it's going to be €2,612.50 minus €2,500 leaves us with €112.50. So it's this minus this leaves us with €112.50. The rate is going to be the interest divided by the principal multiplied by 100% to get a percentage. So the rate is the interest divided by the principal. So think about your IPR triangle. So the interest is €112.50. We divide that by the principal, so the original amount, which is 2,500, given at the start of the question, and then multiply it by 100 or 100 over 1 and stick on your percentage symbol, and you get 4.5%. So the rate of interest was 4.5%. A sum of money is invested at 7% per annum per year. If it amounts to €6,848 after 1 year, find the sum invested. So the amount at the end of year 1 is €6,848, which is equal to 107% or 1.07 as a decimal. So if the rate was 7% and the original amount was 100%, then it's going to be 100% plus 7% gives us 107%. So €6,848 is equal to 107%, or 1.07, whichever you want to use. So the sum invested is going to be 6,848 divided by 1.07, which is 6,400. So the other way to work this out is to say, well, €6,848 is equal to 107%. So dividing both sides by 107, we get 1%, so €64 is equal to 1%, and then multiplying both sides by 100 gives us 100%, so we get €6,400 is equal to 100%, which is the sum invested, the original amount. €8,000 is invested for 3 years at compound interest. The rate for the first year is 5%, and for the second year is 6%. Find the amount of the investment at the end of 2 years. At the end of the third year, the money invested amounted to €9,260.16. Calculate the rate of interest for the third year. So the amount at the end of year 1 is going to be 8,000 multiplied by 1.05. That's €8,400. And the 1.05 comes from the 5%. So 100% plus 5% is 105%, which is the same thing as 1.05. So the amount at the end of year 2 is going to be 8,400, which we got from here, multiplied by 1.06. So that represents the 6% added on. So 1.06 is the same as 106%. And that gives us €8,904. The interest for the third year is €9,260.16. That was given in the question up here. So we're going to subtract the €8,904 from here to leave us with €356.16. So that is the interest for the third year, €356.16. So the rate of interest is going to be 356.16 divided by €8,904 times 100 over 1 or times 100 and stick on your percentage symbol, which gives you 4%. So it was the interest divided by the amount at the end of year 2 times 100 or times 100 over 1, stick on your percentage symbol, and you get 4%. So again, this is from our IPR triangle. What sum of money invested for 3 years at 8% per annum per year compound interest would amount to €1,007.77? So the amount at the end of year 3 is €1,007.77, which is equal to 108% or 1.08. So the start of the third year is going to be €1,007.77 divided by 1.08, which is €933.12. So another way to work this out is to say €1,007.77 is equal to 108%. So divide both sides by 108 to get 1%, which is 9.3312. Don't round off here because you'll have an error in your answer. And then multiply by 100 to get 100%, so you get €933.12. A person invested €10,000 in a building society. The rate of interest for the first year was 2.5%. At the end of the first year, the person invested a further €1,000. The rate of interest for the second year was 2%. Calculate the value of the investment at the end of the second year. At the end of the third year, the total investment amounted to €11,934. Calculate the rate of interest for the third year. So the amount at the end of year 1 is going to be €10,000 times 1.025, which is €10,250. So this 1.025 comes from the 2.5%. So 100% plus 2.5% is 102.5%, which as a decimal is 1.025. So the start of the second year is the 10,250 from here, plus the €1,000, the further €1,000 invested, is equal to €11,250. So that's the amount at the start of the second year. The amount at the end of year 2 is 11,250, so that's from here, multiplied by 1.02, which is equal to €11,475. So the 1.02 comes from here, so 2% plus 100% gives us 102%, which is 1.02 as a decimal. So the amount at the end of year 3 is €11,934. So that was given in the question up there. Therefore, the interest for the third year is going to be €11,934 given in the question, minus €11,475, which we worked out up here, which was the amount at the end of year 2, is €459. So that's the interest for the third year, €459. So the rate of interest is going to be €459 divided by €11,475, which we got from up here, the amount at the end of year 2, times 100 or times 100 over 1, and stick on your percentage symbol, is 4%. So it's the interest for the third year, so I, divided by the €11,475, that's the amount at the end of year 2, and times it by 100 or 100 over 1 is equal to 4%. So again, this is our IPR triangle being used here.